All right, so we're going to go ahead and get started as people are coming in. So hello, I am Amanda, and so welcome to Audience Profiles, getting to know your customers and prospects better. So for those of you who don't know us, I'm Amanda Sett, Creative Director and CEO here at Rock, Paper, Scissors. And we are a branding and marketing firm that works with our clients to help them align their message and brand with their team, their community, and their audience. So they're speaking from one voice to achieve their vision and purpose. So we've been doing this and been in business for over 30 years. So we've seen a lot of changes and done a lot of changing ourselves. And we are all doing a lot more changing right now. And so that's part of why we're doing these webinars to help everybody realign and get what you need to get your business back on track. And so today joining us is our senior content marketer, Valerie Kinney.
Good morning, everyone. So before we dive into today's topic, we wanted to give you all a heads up that this is not just a presentation, it's conversation. So feel free to post any questions or comments in that chat box at the bottom of your screen during this presentation, and we will discuss them in the Q&A at the end. And if you're listening to this after the live broadcast, go ahead and post your questions and we'll definitely follow up with you as soon as we can. So to get started, a couple of months ago, we presented a webinar about getting feedback from your customers because with COVID-19 and all the different things that are going on in our world right now, people's perceptions are shifting. And so there are a lot of different ways you can use feedback from your customers and your audience members to figure out what next steps you need to take. And so as we're looking at this and how people's thoughts on how to make a purchasing decision or what have you are changing, we wanted to share one of our favorite ways to document this data, and that is with audience profiles. So what exactly is an audience profile? It is basically a stereotype of your audience members that kind of helps you better understand not only who they are, but also where they're coming from and their point of view and how they think. So these audience profiles summarize demographic and psychographic information of the people in your current audience or the audience you're trying to reach and connect with. So if you're not 100% sure of the demographics and psychographics, what those are, don't worry because we're going to cover it in just a second. But the big question here is, why do audience profiles even matter? So audience profiles help you gain a better understanding, like we mentioned, of who you're speaking to and the perspective and insight into the challenges, goals, needs, and backgrounds of these people. They also help you narrow who your audience really is because you might think your audience is one group of people when in fact it's a different group. They also help you find different points for connecting with your audience members. And then they also provide guidance for all aspects of branding and marketing.
So now imagine, and this is why this is important. Now imagine if everyone in your organization was not only on the same page, but also in the same book. With everyone on the same page, you're not just fighting internally to align so that you stand a better chance of connecting with your audience members to really maximize the resources. And this really helps your organization. Sometimes when you're working through who you think that audience is, one person they know they have a clear picture and they know exactly who your audience is, and their audience is an apple, and that other team member says they have a very clear vision of what that audience is, and it's actually an orange. And so really what we're trying to do is get everybody on the same page because your audience really is a banana. And so just to add some fun to this, but that's what happens. And we jest with that, but that's a part of what we're seeing is we start to make stories in our minds and we think we know who we're talking to, but once again, it's not quite the same. So this is helping everybody get on the same page with who your audience really is, and you all understand it's the same person.
So as we mentioned earlier, these audience profiles consist of a mix of information based on demographics and psychographics to create that quick snapshot of the types of people currently in your audience to help you kind of figure out who they are, how they think, and what makes them tick. So demographic factors, well, first of all, the demographics itself, that is the statistical data relating to the population and particular groups within it, or a particular sector of the population. So that's going to include information like names, ages, their titles or occupations, gender, zip code or location, their marital status, family size, and language spoken. Psychographics, on the other hand, is really kind of getting into people's minds and how they think. So this is the study or classification of people according to their attitudes, aspirations, and other psychographical criteria. And this is especially true for market research. So you're going to not only be looking at that demographic information, but also what types of activities or hobbies people are into, their personal or cultural values. Not enough coffee yet this morning. Behaviors, interests, social class, lifestyle, and how or where they consume information. So you're really starting to pull a lot more ways to connect with people by learning this information. So
one of the question is that we get a lot is, how many of these profiles do I need? And that can be a little bit of an overwhelming question because it's different for everyone. So that's good and bad news. There's no right or wrong answer to this. But what we usually do is we suggest breaking it up into 3 different categories to start to figure out how do you prioritize this, because not every audience you want to spend and invest as much time into. So we break it into 3. Your primary audience is your bread and butter, then your secondary audience, and your flanker audience. So I'm going to use a football metaphor, and I'm going to go ahead and apologize. This is when you're going to learn that even though I live in the South, I don't know football as well as I should, but it's still a really, really good metaphor for what this to really explain what this is. So first up is your primary audience. That's who you're trying to get the ball to. That is the guy in the end zone. This is the person who is going to buy from you every time. You want to be super clear about what that is. Your secondary audience is the other guys on the field trying to help get the ball in the end zone. Sometimes they have to grab the ball because it gets fumbled or there's an opportunity. So they're not going to pick it up every time, but they need to know what's going on so they can act when they're ready. So they're an important audience, but you might not get as much revenue from them, but you want to be aware of them. Then your flanker audience, these are the guys on the sideline. They're still a part of that game. They're still a part of your story, but they're not going to necessarily buy from you today, but they are still impacted by the game and the process. So that's really what we're looking at, is you want to be very distinct about those, because it's very easy if you don't take the time to prioritize and understand these different factors. Sometimes we'll see clients start to really feel like they need to put a lot of focus and effort into this flanker audience to convert it, but they're not going to convert as much because they're not in the game, but they could influence other people. So they're not worthy of totally discounting, but they're also not worth your top prioritization to convert. We want to put more and more of your effort, resources, time, money, any of that into your primary and to your secondary, but we don't want to ignore them, because we do want to make sure that they're not offended if we have messaging to them. So that's how we really recommend coordinating and prioritizing your audiences. So just kind of start with that process, break them into that, and we'll get into just a little bit of how you come up with those groups of what will go into those. So talking about those levels of what those audiences are, now we might want to, it might seem overwhelming of like, okay, we're going to make these profiles. We just learned about what demographics are. We know what psychographics are. So what is that first step of starting to decide, how do you even tackle this? So we like to use the metaphor with audience profiles. And the process is we have our snorkeling level of audience profiles, and then we have our scuba diving. And so per those 2 options, snorkeling is on the surface. It's still valuable. You still see those beautiful fish, and those fish, i.e., are your audience. It's an amazing experience. You gain a lot of perspective from it, and it's a valuable thing. But not everybody is ready to get certified, has the time, the attention, or even desire to go scuba diving, and that's okay. You can run a very successful business with our quote unquote snorkeling version of audience profiles. But if you're ready to go deeper, if you're ready to launch a new product and you need to do like market research and you need to get a closer look, like at that turtle, we got to work on that scuba diving version of it. So that's where we really want you to kind of think about what is going to be the right choice for you at this point in your business.
So if you're just getting started with this, never done it before, focus on just observing your audience. This is snorkeling for beginners, observation and documentation. So you're going to just focus on kind of what you can see and make note of that, just like you would when you're first starting out snorkeling and like just sticking your face in the water to get used to wearing the mask and breathing through the tube. You're just kind of observing those surroundings, and you're not necessarily swimming yet. You're just sticking that face in the water. So snorkeling for beginners, definitely start here if you've never created audience profiles before, if you don't have data to start with, or you don't have a lot of time to dedicate to this. this could be your first step that you build off of later on.
So we have a quick, easy 5-step process to get you into this. You'll notice we have that downloads available icon. So we'll send out follow-up material after this webinar to everybody who's attending. So you'll get all of this. And if you're watching this on YouTube, we'll have links for you to be able to access this as well. So the 5 steps are: first, gather your team. We'll go into a little bit more detail on what that should look like. Then you want to list and prioritize your products or services. This is really critical because we don't want to focus on an audience and invest time and money if they're not actually generating revenue for you. So we want to start with, okay, what do you have and how do we work from there? Step 3 is you're going to fill in these audience profiles. And this is just observation. So we'll show you some samples in a minute. Then we're going to share it with everyone once your team has worked through and documented. And then you want to build in a review process. Just like we're living in right now, the world is changing. Your audience profiles will change too. Your audience either matures, there's new products, there's a pandemic, whatever that might be. You want to make sure that this work becomes a living, breathing process.
So step 1 is to gather your team. This could be people internally or perhaps a member of the RPS team if you're working with us. But these need to be people who interact with your customers and prospects and or support your marketing efforts as well as your customer service efforts. So that is the very first and most essential step to getting started.
All right, and then next, we'll go through listing products and services.
Right. So you're going to not only want to look at products and services, but noting the costs and revenues so that you have context for each item and start looking at and discussing patterns that you notice about who is buying or using this certain product or service. So you can start determining groupings based on similar characteristics. So let's put this in perspective with a little bit of a hypothetical situation. We've all seen the paint party shops where you can do a BYOB and have a girls' night out or whatever. So that's what we're going to look at here. So if we fill this in, we start thinking about some of the products and services. We talked about the BYOB paint parties, but some of them also do kids art classes and camps, adult art classes, mommy and me, daddy and me, date nights, and then company parties. So as you can see, we've filled in, again, hypothetical situation, who those audience members could be. So a lot of times the BYOB paint parties is going to be the 21 plus crowd, mostly women. They're going to have a fun girls' night out. Not to say that guys couldn't do that too, but we're going to assume girls are mostly going to be interested in this. Whereas kids art classes and camps and parent-child classes, those are going to be more families, probably with kids about age 5 and up. Adult art classes could pretty much be anyone who's like high school graduate and above. Date night classes are going to be couples ranging all across the board. And then company parties are probably going to be business owners or whoever is in charge of company outings and morale. So next up, you're going to start ranking your audience by segments and priority groups. So if there's a group that you know that product or service continually brings you revenue, that's where you want to focus a lot of your efforts and rank them top priority. Or if there's someone that you want to reach with a new product or service, then you might want to prioritize those higher on the list as well.
Sometimes in this process, as you're listing these out, you'll realize a segment you're totally neglecting, and that becomes a priority because it would take a little bit of effort just to start generating some revenue there. So we have all of these worksheets in there, and these are really good. You can use them with your team, use them as a brainstorming exercise. Okay, what those products are, okay, what's most important, so you can work through those agreements. All right, so once you have those prioritized, then you want to actually start building out these profiles. So we try and keep these simple. This is, once again, this is snorkeling. So this is high level. This is just observation based. There's no right or wrong. This is just what you and your team are seeing and starting to fill this in. There's so much power in writing this down and being able to go back to it and not guess. There's so many times, even me as a business leader, I see it as like somebody comes and asks me something and I tell them, and then they come back to me and something else has changed. So the answer the next day is totally different. And I don't necessarily realize it because I didn't write it down, because I was influenced by all these different factors. But when it's written down, it's a lot easier to come back and say, hey, the world changed yesterday. Let's start to revise this and then make sure everybody knows all of the revisions that are happening. So we've broken this out into, it's basically 4 different sections. So you guys can change them out. the first one is a demographic. So fill in the location, the marital status, the children, the age, average household income, and gender. You can add more to these. Like this is just a template to get started, but this is said kind of basic. It gets you in the right book and hopefully get everybody on the same page. Then you want to fill in psychographics. And this is why you want anybody from your team who is in contact with your customers, because they've talked to them. They know, and well, hopefully they've talked to them, and they know a little bit about their lives. They know that they, maybe they really like to do weekend trips and they're traveling all the time, or maybe they're big wine connoisseurs or whatever that is. Start to fill that in. So that's just starting to document what that is. So then you guys can determine, is this actually the truth? As you start to say, we believe our audience is Sunday churchgoers. And then if everybody's starting to observe that, they can start to notice, if, wait a second, no, we actually have a much wider belief group, and we need to not necessarily narrow ourselves down. So it's starting those conversations about that. We also left room for, usually you want to put a picture in there, especially if it's older or younger. I'm going to remind everybody that 65% of humans are visual learners. So put a picture in to help people understand, like, this is your young demographic or your older demographic, going back to that painting class, showing the couples on there versus showing like the kids class. So that just helps quickly reference what that is. And then the section underneath that is probably the most important part, is what are those people's pain points? Like, why are they choosing to come and do this? What's motivating them? So we went ahead and filled one in so we could just take a look and you guys can see what it looks like. So we filled in some of the demographic information. We've also filled in a bunch of the psychographic information, and then I'm going to show you the pain points. So some of the pain points for these people, looking at the date night crowd specifically, is being able to spend quality time with their partner amidst their busy lives, or finding an affordable and unique date night activity close to home, want to support a local business, and then also looking for opportunities to connect with others in similar stages of life. So that content there ends up starting to be the basis of your marketing messaging moving forward. So that would be a big piece, and that's why it's so important. That's the piece that usually gets edited the most when you first start doing these. All right. So once you've documented, sharing is caring, make sure this gets shared with your whole organization. I usually recommend, well, in this world, you might need to do it via a Zoom meeting, but some type of meeting to share it and get feedback from your team, especially since we talked about these being observation-based. See if people agree with them and see if there's anything that they want to change. And you might even, after you present them, hand them to everybody and say, hey, mark this up and let's come back in a month. And let's see, has anything changed? Are our observations true? You'll notice it seems a little bit like science class, where this profile is your hypothesis or your theory, right? It's your theory of what it's going to be, and then you're going to go test it, and then you're going to come back and make sure that that test is correct. So that's an important thing to be thinking about with that. How are you making that statement of what it is, and then shifting into what it can be? So after that first initial meeting where you get everybody, you want to make sure that this becomes a part of your ongoing culture. So really make sure that you schedule, like every 3 to 6 months, maybe have everybody, at least on your marketing team, look at it. If there's major revisions, once again, share it with the whole organization, because everybody in your organization is serving this audience. And the better equipped they are to understand that audience, the more opportunity and innovation you're going to start to see from your team as well.
Okay, so when you're ready to learn a little bit more, but aren't quite ready for deep dive, maybe you don't have it in your budget to do market research yet, but you still want to learn more about your audience, there's a couple of steps that you can add into the process for what we call advanced snorkeling, and this starts at step 3. So as you can see here, we have 3A and 3B, 3A being research, and then 3B being regroup and fill in your audience profiles. So that's where the big changes are with this. So when you're doing step 3A, that research, you don't need just a ton of resources, and there's a lot already out there. Use your industry and government resources. City and state governments and census data are great resources to use, as are foundations or groups that regularly conduct research specific to your industry or your market. So for example, we work with a lot of nonprofits here at Rock, Paper, Scissors. So if you're a nonprofit in the state of Georgia, and you want to see what's available and out there, you could connect with the Georgia Center for Nonprofits or maybe the United Way's local or regional chapters to see if they have any information that they could share with you. So don't get too overwhelmed with this. There are resources with a couple clicks of the keyboard.
So just to what this next step kind of looks like once you got that research, you still want to bring your team together because you want to have those observations that you talked about in those audience profiles. And then you want to have conversations on how or if the actual research data is different. And it's amazing what starts to happen when you start to see that. You might have think, okay, our average household income, we think it's probably about, 75 to 100,000. And then you start getting the data for your community and you'd be surprised how much it shifts. For this year, just a reminder, it's a census year. So all the data is about 10 years old. So it'll be very interesting to see what our numbers look like as it's amidst all this. But so those are just good things, great resources to be able to pull. The Postal Service is also another great resource for demographic. And it even has some psychographic, but mainly demographic data. All right. So scuba diving. All right, so when you're ready to deep dive into even more information and data collection, it helps to add some market research and audience personas into your process. So market research is a more lengthy process in which you're gathering information about your customers and prospects to build more realistic profiles that help you determine your likely product or service, if it's going to be successful or sustainable in these audiences. So this research tells you how these individuals conduct their own information research when they're looking for products or services, and to help you spot industry trends or factors that influence how they buy, among a lot of other things. So it really lets you, observe up close what's going on in those situations. So I want to take a second. I introduced a new term. I introduced audience personas. So before we get too deep, I just want to make sure I clarify that an audience profile is, we showed you that example. So it's a listing of data. It's an outline of what your audience looks like. However, an audience profile or persona, I'm going to get them mixed up. An audience persona is more robust. It is typically a fictitious character. So you actually flesh it out as, Jane comes to our painting classes, and you actually write a whole life story for her, and you really map out and it's all based on those psychographic information. What is her perception? What are her problems? So this is definitely next level when we're talking about audiences. So we want to make sure you guys are aware that there's another level that you can always go deeper. And especially if inbound marketing happens to be something you're interested in, this would be a critical piece. You don't have to do market research to do audience personas. These can still be based on observation, but typically you're not going to go into audience personas unless you're ready to really go into some type of data, big data kind of opportunity with your marketing. So the process is a little bit different. A lot of times, with the market research, you might want a specialized firm. We'll touch on that a little bit, but before you even start this, you really want to determine your desired outcome. Like, why do you want to do this? What is it really going to shift? And if you can start with that result in mind, and we preach this a lot, it's a lot easier for the rest of the process because you're not trying to figure it out in the middle and shifting into what you need. But so figure out, what do you need from market research? Like, what is that really going to tell you, and how is it going to change your business? Then you can select a market research team. You can go super high-end, specialized, thousands and thousands of dollars to do it, but you get really good information. Or you can do a little bit more of a organic process too. Then you collect that market research, you build your audience profiles and maybe personas, depending on what you're doing, and then you adjust and launch a marketing strategy based on those results. So it's just a little bit different of a process. There's a lot of multi-steps in there, but just kind of giving you how this would change. And it's a lot of it in that first step. So if you decide you are going to do this route, you do potentially want to look at actually hiring a market research firm. So marketing groups like ourselves, we can do some market research. We do this with quite a few of our clients through surveys and some call processes. But if you want to go big, you really do want to use the right tool for the job. So you want to make sure you understand that not everybody does it the same way. It's a lot like building a house, for instance. If you want somebody to come in and build do renovations, you hire somebody different than if you're going to do, a from scratch or even a 5-story parking deck. You have a different tool for the job. Do you want to hire the right team for that? So that's an important thing to be thinking about when you're doing this. Hence why our first step is to determine your outcome. What does this really need to look like? And so I just want to just kind of a PSA for everybody that there are multiple ways to do market research. Kind of wrap this up. We love this quote from Seth Godin. It says, one thing you could do is to spam 1 billion people once. Another thing is to identify a single individual and spend a year bringing this person just the right message with relentless frequency. And you know what? Both of those are somewhat exhausting. And so part of all of this process is understanding that neither of those options are necessarily the right option. And there's this beautiful place in the middle of really understanding who your audience is and connecting with them. And that is our goal, is to find that sweet spot between spamming everybody and just the right message.
So applying that concept, when you take the time to work on your audience profiles, you see the progression from just sending out messages left and right about what you do and posting them everywhere to more intentional marketing, because you've taken that time to really understand your audience more deeply, and you can craft marketing messages in a way that speak to their needs and their pain points, and you can meet them right where they're at with that message wherever they are, whether it's on Facebook or through email marketing, rather than sending messages out there like you're throwing it against the wall and seeing what sticks and just hoping and praying that people find you.
Exactly. All right, so with that,
Amanda's about to send out a little poll for you
I am
guys.
about to send out a poll. So if anybody has any questions, please post them in the chat. We got some in advance. So the poll that I'm setting out is about future webinar topics. So let us know what you guys are interested in. We're trying to be not stick with our plan that we made at the end of last year, but really make sure we're coming up with stuff that is relevant for you guys. So please take a second to just let us know what you're interested in, and we'll make sure that we're getting content to you. All right, so while y'all are doing that, let's look at some questions.
All right. First one says, I'm still a little fuzzy on the difference between profiles and personas. I know that personas are deeper, but are there different cases where you'd choose a persona over an audience profile?
Yeah, so every business can use an audience profile. Like, that's just hands down. Every business should have an audience profile. Personas, on the other hand, this is really, and I used the term earlier, inbound marketing. So if you're going to use software or partners like HubSpot, Marketo, SharpSpring, trying to think of other ones, but those are the big ones, where you're doing more marketing automation and you're wanting to call centers or anything like that, that's a big reason to use those personas. It also helps having those personas if you have a bigger sales team, to make sure people understand like what those pain points are. Each one of those personas is based on a pain point. So that would be another reason that you want to help your sales team quickly identify what this person is and what that solution that you're going to provide them with. So those would be the reasons. So that's why I said it's good to know what this is. It's a tool to grow into, but every business should write up audience profiles.
All right, next question. Are there any indicators to look for to know when to snorkel versus scuba? For example, KPIs, KSIs, to know if you're working too hard.
Yeah, and a lot of it is, at some point with businesses growing, you outgrow snorkeling, and then you need to start scuba diving. And it's usually a lot of times you realize you're either you're not growing the way you want to, or you're realizing that there's a lot more hands-on process, and your team is starting to say, hey, we could automate this, or could we automate this? And anytime that you're seeing that repetition is typically when you're starting to think about marketing automation and inbound marketing. And that would be, so that's not necessarily a tangible indicator. That would just be an observation there. But the tangible ones, if you're looking at key performance indicators or key strategic indicators, could just be stagnant growth, could be turnover, or it could be frustration in the team. So those would be indicators that I would go, hey, this might be time to increase that. Another one that isn't kind of listed in this, but I'm going to go on a tangent for a second. If you're going to launch a new product or go into a new industry segment or something like that, that's a lot of times market research is worth it, because even though market research is expensive, it's a lot less expensive than launching a new product. So doing that market research just to see if people are interested in it or will buy it. So it's definitely one of those, a lot of people look at the first time they do market research, that looks like a big ticket item. But when you factor in how much revenue you could get after doing the market research and being successful in there, or how much you might lose if you made the wrong move, it ends up being a really smart investment piece. So those are some of the factors that go into that.
All right. How often do the profiles and or personas need to be updated?
A minimum of once a year, you should look at them. And like, this is when it's good to have a master marketing calendar or something that's reoccurring, or it's when you do your annual planning at the end of the year, or middle of the year, depending on your fiscal year. It's time to look at it. Anytime we do an annual plan with any of our clients, that's one of the first slides we look at. And a lot of times we don't change it, but we just want everybody's eyeballs on it and say, hey, has anything changed? But like right now, you're going to touch them more often. We're seeing people's perception shift a lot of how they trust things. People aren't going to the grocery store. They're still buying things online. Like there's a lot has changed in that world. And so we know that we're going to be a little bit up in the air right now. And until all this virus settles down, it's going to be an evolving game until we have something that stabilizes again. Then we can kind of go back to older versions, maybe, but maybe not. So right now, I would say you should probably look at them once a quarter. If you're looking at your quarterly financial numbers, you just add to that process. You should look at your audience profiles as well.
All right. Last question, unless anybody else submits one as I'm reading this. How do you know if it's better to spam 1 million people once versus identifying a single individual and sending that person just the right message with relentless frequency? Are there any factors to look for with your audience that helps you make a decision about which approach is best?
You should never spam 1 million people once. So we start with that. So a big part of this is you want to build a relationship. And that's all this is about, and that repetition. So we'll talk about influence, or if you want to say manipulation, whatever connects better on this. How to influence people to really understand and start to build trust is through repetition and through that consistency in it. So you want to really start to narrow down, this is what we've been talking about, narrow down to who that ideal audience is. Who is that primary audience? Who is in the end zone that you want to catch your product or service? And so those are things that you really want to focus on with that. From an approach standpoint,
there's a lot of factors that play into that.
There are, and it really depends on what you're selling, what you're doing, and that's when you really want to sit down. And once you have that profile, you want to ask how are they getting information? And that is a huge way to determine what your marketing channels and efforts should be. So if you've done that profile, that answers a lot of these questions of, if it's an older demographic and they live on Facebook right now because they can't leave their house, all right, you need to figure out how to be on Facebook. Or if it's a younger demographic who, lives in Snapchat and TikTok, all right, let's figure out what to do in those areas as well. So it's just trying to figure out what they are so that you can do that repetition. And we go back to that good old marketing adage, if they need to see it 7 times. So how do you get that repetition? So those are some big things to consider with that.
All right. Time for one last question. What helps you understand the pain points to better understand which are the most important per profile?
Oh, let's see. Talking to people. That's really, really pick up the phone, talk to people in your company or people who are, calling in with complaints or reach out to good customers. Us as humans are better computers than anything that we're ever going to build that's going to give you the data for it. So having those conversations, you're going to have that observation, put an experienced person in there. Don't just send an intern in to make phone calls. It's going to be a lot more valuable from that standpoint. So, all right. Well, thank you everybody for coming and joining us.
Yeah. Great conversations, great questions. So go ahead and save the date for Thursday, July 16th at 11 a.m. That will be our next webinar.
Mhm.
Our topic is to be determined, but we will include that with our follow-up communication along with the link to register for that webinar. And we will be sending out here in the next little bit a feedback survey, so we can go ahead and get you guys feedback while we're finishing collecting items. And we'll be posting this webinar on YouTube as well. So if you missed anything or want to go back and review something, that will be available soon, and we'll email you guys as soon as we have all the follow-up materials for you.
Absolutely. Thanks, guys.